From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Wednesday, July 2, 2025. The jury's still out in the Erin Patterson triple murder case, and on Wednesday they'll begin a third day of deliberations. That's about the fatal lunch of beef Wellingtons laced with deadly death cap mushrooms. Patterson has pleaded not guilty. As soon as there's a verdict, you'll be the first to know by joining our subscribers at theaustralian.com.au. The crowd at Glastonbury's music festival has turned on Keir Starmer, and so has the rest of Britain apparently, as populists Nigel Farage on the right and Jeremy Corbyn on the left steal the Labor PM's popularity. Today, what's gone wrong for Starmer and British Labor just a year after their landslide election victory? Before we begin, this episode is about British politics, so there's a bit of swearing.
The Prime Minister of your country, not mine, said he didn't want us to play. So fuck Keir Starmer. Fuck Keir Starmer!
Starmer is having a rough time of it lately. He's fallen behind reform in the polls.
Labour, of course, are facing growing calls for regime change now as Keir Starmer
How
comes
has a
under
government
pressure.
less than a year old allowed this revolt to happen?
Our in-house UK political expert is Richard Ferguson, who, as you'll hear, is a proud Scotsman. Richard, Keir Starmer has only been Prime Minister for a year, and the joy and exuberance of his election has been replaced by chants of "fuck Keir Starmer" at the Glastonbury Music Festival. What's gone wrong?
I think, Claire, that Keir Starmer's first year has revealed three huge problems with him. Number one, his election was not a vote for Keir Starmer and Labour. It was a vote against Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Theresa May, David Cameron and the Tories and everything that they had stood for the past 14 years. Number two, he has proven to be an awful political manager and communicator. There were already doubts about his political management and communication early on when he'd become the leader of the Labour Party after the catastrophe of Jeremy Corbyn. But he'd managed to quell some of that, but he's made some very bad decisions since he's been in government. And three is actually not in his control, which is that Britain is just in a dark mood. Its productivity is disastrous. Brexit has struggled in lots of ways. He has a very, very shallow mandate. And two, he's just made some really bad mistakes.
It wasn't long after his election that he got himself into controversy over accepting gifts from Labor donors. And these are things that Keir Starmer, who seems to be a pretty wealthy guy, he's a QC, didn't seem to need. Gifts of clothes for his wife, for example, hospitality, accommodation. Why would Keir Starmer have accepted things like that?
Oh, absolutely, Claire. The acceptance of the gifts from the Labour donor, Lord Ali, and the early chaos in his office where his Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, lasted a couple of weeks before she was sacked, were huge problems for Keir Starmer because they were huge dents in the promise. The promise from Keir Starmer was, I am the antithesis of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. I am not chaotic. I am organised, I am sober, I am serious. There is no drama with me. So when he had to sack his Chief of Staff who wasn't getting on with anybody, that was a huge problem. And then two of the acceptance of Lord Ali, it was, I am the former Director of Public Prosecutions in Britain. I am a human rights lawyer. I am integrity in human form. And immediately that was wiped away after all the scandals that followed Boris Johnson with the COVID parties and the women and all of that. So the only two things that appear to make him authentic, considering he, is considered in Britain to have no political opinions of his own, was that he's a man of integrity and he's a man of sobriety. And those were both wiped away very early on, and it's been downhill ever since.
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is this. They left a £22 billion black hole. And they hid it from the OBR. Richard Hughes is absolutely clear.
Keir Starmer's government came into power claiming that the Tories had left them with a tens of billions of dollar black hole that they needed to plug. And one of the first attempts to do that was scrapping winter fuel payments for pensioners. That's a very dearly held value of many of Labor's own MPs, that they help poor people through winter with payments. The government's going to be means testing some of those. Where has that fuel issue ended up, and why has that been so hard for Keir Starmer to navigate?
The winter fuel payment was an absolutely disastrous moment for Keir Starmer and showed his lack of political nous, I think, Claire. For years, the Labour Party, including himself, had been campaigning against Tory austerity and paring back welfare budgets. Now, this is not to say that welfare reform isn't important, and often, as was the case with Hawke Keating, for example, it's up to Labour governments to have the political capital to make tough economic reform and welfare reform that, Tories wouldn't get away with. But he didn't have the sweeteners, he didn't have the message to explain why he was making this his first order of business, taking winter fuel payments away from pensioners, essentially. And it exposed him very, very badly. It showed that he didn't understand his own MPs. He does not have a good management of his huge majority. And he didn't understand why he was elected. He had been elected to not be a Tory, and he was acting like a Tory. I think in many ways, his welfare reforms are exactly what Britain needs. But he just falls into the trap again and again of appearing to go against the principles of his own party in a way that Tony Blair, despite the fact that people talk about Tony Blair as a Tory in disguise in the Iraq War and all this, Tony Blair was very good at balancing the left and the right of the Labour Party. Keir Starmer is not good at that.
Keir Starmer backflipped on those winter fuel payments, and now he's had to backflip again, this time under threat of a revolt by his own Labor MPs. And this is about bigger welfare reforms centring on something called the Personal Independence Payment, or PIP. It's one of those great government acronyms, isn't it, Richard? But it's a bit like Australia's NDIS. It means a payment to help you if you are disabled with the costs of daily life. The government announced dramatic cuts to that program, then faced with Labor MPs' horror, had to scale back those changes. Was there a risk there, or is there a risk that Keir Starmer could lose his position as Prime Minister?
I think in the medium term, the bigger risk is Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, losing her position.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that question. The government carefully considered all of the policies in the autumn budget in the context of the difficult fiscal inheritance that we face from the party opposite. The decisions to increase...
She seems to be the one that Keir Starmer will throw under the bus, because it seems a lot of Labour MPs are still very unhappy with the concessions that Keir Starmer has made. He could still lose this fight. From a policy perspective, Britain's budget and, probably a lot of disabled people in Britain would benefit from changes that help them get into work, that if they can work and they want to work, will actually benefit them. And Keir Starmer has said this. The only problem is that every time Keir Starmer says something, he changes his mind once it gets politically difficult for him. He appears to have very little political backbone.
One thing that he has been relatively staunch on is support for Israel and critique of anti-Semitism. And that's brought him into conflict with the hip-hop trio Kneecap, which during their headlining set at Glastonbury led a chant of "fuck Keir Starmer." He had been critical of Kneecap's inclusion, given that one of them is facing allegations, which he denies, of supporting Hezbollah. The crowd at Glastonbury have paid $800 for their tickets. They are wealthy. They're kind of progressive people who you would think are rusted on Labor voters. Who are they going to vote for? Is it the Greens like it would be here?
Well, this is the thing. The Glastonbury set's biggest problem is that they all love Jeremy Corbyn. They all love Jeremy Corbyn. They still cannot get over the fact that Jeremy Corbyn lost 2019 so badly. It was the Labour Party's worst defeat ever, and they haven't quite gotten over that. So the biggest threat at the moment, Claire, could be Jeremy Corbyn.
Quite simply, isn't the truth that this is a government that protects the super rich, while the rest of us pick up the bill through cuts, austerity, poverty, homelessness, low wages, and slashing of local services all over the country. That is the reality of a Tory government.
He seems to be on his way to setting up his own political party. He's very close to a group of Muslim independents who won seats at the last election in some key Labour areas. So it could be a kind of a socialist version of reform that's a threat to him. But the polls would say that in the Labour heartlands, the threat is not Jeremy Corbyn, it is Nigel Farage. It is reform.
There just seems to be a total lack of comprehension on this panel, and indeed amongst this audience, even by the left-wing standards of the BBC. I mean, this lot's pretty left-wing.
Reform seems to have completely exterminated what life was left in the Tories, and it's a huge threat to Keir Starmer. So he will face a lot of pressure from within the Labour Party to take a more Jeremy Corbyn-esque approach on Palestine, welfare, but the polls still say that the threat is Nigel Farage.
So it's populism on the left, but really populism on the right that is a massive threat to Keir Starmer. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. He is a technocrat in a country that is not interested in technocracy anymore. It wants radical change. That is what Nigel Farage and Jeremy Corbyn in a far less charismatic manner represent. Do you know what, Claire? He really has the Joe Biden problem, I think, Keir Starmer, which is that you can be a boring, competent technocrat, but you have to be boring and competent. And so far, his government has failed at both.
Coming up, what are the lessons for Australia's Labor PM? What does it tell us about Anthony Albanese? There's criticism here of Anthony Albanese from the left and from the right for not doing exactly what they want on issues like, for example, Gaza. But generally he has been extremely cautious on, for example, issues like America.
Yep.
You know, he's not doing what the Americans want. He's also not doing exactly what the Chinese want on defence spending, for example. Does the Keir Starmer example explain Anthony Albanese's behaviour?
I think that Keir Starmer is an example of Anthony Albanese on what not to do. In an interview with the Sunday Times, our sister masthead in Britain, Keir Starmer said that one of the reasons he hasn't been able to deal with these welfare reform rebellions among his own party is because he's been so focused on foreign affairs. Anthony Albanese has been a lot more clever in making sure that he is being seen at points to making his base happy. Going all in on climate change and green infrastructure, paid parental leave, superannuation. The other thing that I think distinguishes Albanese and Starmer is that Starmer's not a politician. Starmer was a lawyer. He acts like a lawyer. He thinks like a lawyer. At the end of the day, Claire, I mean, I don't know how many barristers and doctors you and I have seen come through Australian politics, and everybody thinks they'll be brilliant because they were a brilliant barrister or a doctor or whatever they did outside Parliament. And then it turns out that they're a crummy politician. While as Anthony Albanese lives and breathes politics since the moment he got out the womb, he is a politician. First and foremost, he knows how to work other politicians. Keir Starmer doesn't know how to do that. He treats everything like a brief in a case in front of the High Court. Sometimes you need to know how to schmooze, you know how to negotiate. And that's not Keir Starmer's strength, while it is Anthony Albanese's strength.
That was The Australian's Richard Ferguson. We've got all the best news, domestic and international, all the time at theaustralian.com.au.